People like John Adams are the reason you can point at it and say it was wrong, though, because John Adams knew it was wrong.
Well, a lot of people are going to be doing things today that are different than the way that each of us is going to be living our lives and say the same thing in 250 years from now. Somebody else is going to be having the same conversation.
Thought it was wrong, clearly.
Abe Lincoln wasn't around then, man. That was still
later on.
That was still later on. And we'll just take the story down. We'll just pass this lineage down. We don't talk American history enough. Actually, it irritates me. A lot of conservatives talk about the importance of knowing history without actually just talking about history. Let's talk this through. So John Adams, you know who his son is? John Quincy Adams. He's the first non-founding father who became a president. Here's a funny fact about him. He was the first, so outside of the founding fathers, he was the first one who was elected president. He actually wasn't a great president. He was elected out after one term. People didn't love him. And so he tried to find everything else he could do. He went and tried to write some books, and he went and tried to start some nonprofits, and none of that spoke to him. He's the only president, John Adams' son, who went back to Congress after being a president. So he's elected to multiple terms of Congress. And you know what he went back to Congress with? Was one thing he regretted not doing as a president, was abolishing slavery. This is long before Abraham Lincoln comes along, okay? So he wanted to abolish slavery. His father was an abolitionist. He didn't accomplish much during his tenure as president. He was a good Secretary of State, but he was not a very good president. Think about the humility to say, I'm not even going to go to the Senate. I'm going to go become a congressman and get reelected multiple times with the mission of abolishing slavery. Now, here's what happens. There was a rule that Congress passes. It's called the gag rule, which stopped people from using the word slavery. Like they literally couldn't use the word slavery because they didn't want people to utter the word because it made them uncomfortable. So this guy's already been the U.S. president. Okay, so he has nothing to lose. He's just a congressman now. He says, I'm going to say the word. I'm going to say it, slavery. Slavery, slavery, slavery. There. Congress has set the rule that you can't say the word slavery. Well, I'm going to say it. So they censure him. And have, just like they have today for George Santos or whatever, they'll have the equivalent of kicking him out of Congress. Mm-hmm. So they have his trial in Congress. And he uses his own personal trial, because this guy's got nothing to lose. They use his own personal trial for saying the word slavery when you're not allowed to say the word slavery to make the case for abolition from the stand of his own trial to being kicked out of Congress. At the end of that, they get rid of the gag rule. So you're allowed to say slavery, which opens up the debates that you're then allowed to have. So a year later, about a year or so later, he's given a speech on the Congress floor. I mean, it's amazing. This guy with this humility. He's given a speech on the Congress floor. He has a stroke in the middle of his speech. He dies right there. He doesn't die quite yet. They take him up to the upstairs room, keep him alive for another couple days. And eventually he dies up in that anteroom outside in the same Congress where he then devoted that later stage of his career. And they took volunteers for who's going to be the person who carries out his funeral rites and carries him out. And the guy who raises his hand and does it was a first-term congressman nobody had heard of, hadn't said a word, by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And so these are the stories of our history, man. We don't tell these stories anymore. And we celebrate. We put back our founding fathers, and we talk about how these people are slave owners, and we're going to dismiss the ideals they set into motion, without recognizing that, like us today, these are imperfect human beings that still strived and to be the best that they possibly could have, just as we do today. And so it bothers me deeply for us to just lazily reject that, as opposed to saying we acknowledge those imperfections, but we're founded on the pursuit of a more perfect union.
Absolutely, but the reason
the pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all. The reason
you can't just dismiss it and say, okay,
I'm not dismissing it, though. Do I sound like I'm dismissing it, Charlemagne?
Yes, but the reason...
I disagree with you, man, and I think
the reason
that
you can't say
if you're going to put me in the
Jefferson,
category of the conversation we had and saying that I just dismissed it out of hand, I think that's unfair. I just think that's unfair. I don't think I dismiss it, but I acknowledge the totality of what a human being is, which is an imperfect and flawed human being who we can still celebrate.
I'm fine with that. But you can't.
That's what we have to be.
But you can't tell people just to ignore the fact that Thomas Jefferson.
I'm not telling people to ignore it, though. Okay. And this is what I think I'm in this to unite the country. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're going to take this seriously, every one of us has to acknowledge the full nuances of our history in every direction. To say that we're not going to listen to Thomas Jefferson or that our founding was illegitimate because they were deeply imperfect and flawed is every bit as bad as somebody who's going to say that I'm going to entirely dismiss the fact that they were slave owners. I think that both of those are mistakes that could lead to the failure of our country as we know it. I think our country will cease to exist if either side of our debate is, on one hand, willing to say, oh, slavery was some made-up myth, and actually I don't know, it was in the interest of, people could say such things. It was the interest of black people to be slaves, whatever.
Ridiculous.
Okay. Well, I think that if we have a different side that says our founding fathers who wrote a Declaration of Independence founded on the pursuit of a more perfect union, right? The pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all. Not claiming we're perfect, but that we're a nation founded on freedom for all who aspire to have it, and that we're imperfect. But we eventually got there 250 years into as darn close as we've ever been. To reject that and say that we can't celebrate that founding because they made a mistake of being slave owners. I think that is every bit as bad for the future of our country versus acknowledging that we are still pursuing that more perfect union.
What I would say is what you talked about with Thomas Jefferson when he took the razor and he took out some of the philosophies that he agreed with. We should take some of those things that we agree with, but then everybody should come to the table because all was not at the table when those people wrote those documents.
We got that.
We have too much of a diverse country now.
We understand that.
Okay.
But my point is not rejecting that or taking a hammer to it. It's more of a different response. It's like, we got it. Like, like at a certain point, we've got to say, we've got it.
We don't, though.
No, but
we can, but we don't.
We got it, and now it's time for 360-degree mercy, clemency, forgiveness across the board, and that we're moving forward as one nation under God. And I think that moment is now, actually. And that's why I ran for president. And clearly I did not succeed to the scale that I wanted to. I'm proud of what we accomplished. As I said, started as ordinary guy, kid of immigrants, came to this country with no money. They would have never imagined that I'm self-funding a presidential campaign to try to reach the people with this message. But I'm not stopping now. And I don't know what form that's going to take in this next phase. But I'm all in for that. And even for people, I don't know if you guys are on the left or not, how you'd characterize yourself, but people have different views.
I'm
asking
moderate.
you, okay, I mean, whatever it means, right? I mean, these labels, what do these things mean, right? Hard right, hard left. I think these things actually mean a lot less right now in an era where we're closer to World War III than we've ever been, and the only bipartisan consensus in the establishment of both parties is to march us closer. Forget the labels. I'm asking those of you who care about the country, and I believe you do. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing every day if you didn't have a care for this country, and I don't think you would be either, man. I mean, I know you like cars. You could be talking about cars the whole time, but you're not. You're talking about this, and I think it's because you care about the country.
How can you care about the country if you support Trump, though?
I do care about the country, and I think that Trump is going to be...
The guy wanted to suspend the Constitution to overturn the results of an election.
Charlemagne, I think that...
He led an attempted coup this country.
I think that a lot of
democracy.
Here's what I will say is...
How can you respect the country if you don't respect democracy?
I'll make a deal with you. We can even do this offline because we're not going to do it here. With an open mind, take a look at the totality of government entrapment in the lead up to the 2020 election and even afterwards. And then you look at the same cases from 60 years ago, and what you realize is this is just history continuing, as it has for the last 60 years. It's a good book I'll give you. My wife actually read it. When I told her I wanted to shut down the FBI, and she's not a terribly political person at all, but if I told her I want to shut down the FBI, she thought it was crazy. She thought a lot of what I'm talking about here sounded like crazy talk, because I would have believed 3-4 years ago myself. She read a book herself. She doesn't take it from me. She's an independent student. She read a book called G-Man. And if everybody is watching this right now, I would recommend taking a look at it too. It's not some right-winger wrote this book. It's as far as I know, some sort of liberal Yale historian, but it's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, not some right-wing screed. G-Man stands for government man. Gives you the history of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Mm-hmm. And once you read that, I think you will likely, most people, I think probably 90% of people will actually come around to having the same views that I do about the torturous impact of that federal bureaucracy. And I think part of a lot of the stuff that we might argue against, what I'll call the woke stuff or whatever, is really just woke smoke to deflect accountability for the failures of that bureaucracy. Right? You take the Federal Department of Education, right? You know what the woke smoke is? Math is racist. You've heard people say this. It's forget about the smoke. Don't fall for the smoke. Fall for the reality that they have failed to teach our kids how to do math for those last 40 years.
You want to know a good book
right?
to read? The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And you'll see how what's going on right now in this country is too close to comfort for what happened.
I think a lot of people would hear you say that, Charlemagne, and I'm one of them, who worry about, all right, forget about the labels. If we have a country that says that, you know what, if you say something on social media and you liked or retweeted a post of one particular political candidate, you're the subject of a subpoena. And We have a candidate of a different party who says that we need to tie your social media account to your government-issued ID, and that the government gets to see every time you've liked or retweeted a social media post, that would be pretty frightening. Yet that's exactly in the Jack Smith investigation of Donald Trump. The subpoena includes, literally on Twitter, you guys use Twitter, anybody who hit like or retweet. You want the government to be able to include that as part of a subpoena, and you got Nikki Haley coming over from the so-called right saying that actually you need to actually have used your driver's license to do it.
I don't think government officials should have social media, period.
And I don't think the government officials should be able to intrude on what you're saying on the internet if you're actually saying it with your expressing your opinion and have the ability to actually come up to you and question you based on what you said either. That sounds a lot like the Third Reich of Germany to me. So you could cut this a lot of different ways. The infringements on free speech to say that if you said the COVID pandemic originated in a lab in China, we're going to lock your account. You can't say that.
That's what Trump wants to do to media who goes against him.
Well, I'm talking about something very specific here. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it wasn't Donald Trump that wanted this to happen.
Can we just admit both sides are full of shit?
I think that both political parties are full of shit.
Okay, now
both political parties are full of shit.
Okay, now we talking.
I think both political parties are full of shit. I will agree with you on that. And that's, a lot of the influence, actually, the influence of money. That's really the problem. Because it's some of the same donors who are writing multi-million-dollar checks that are pulling the strings of both of these people like puppets. They're like pawns on a chessboard. And so that's why I got probably more connections to be able to raise outside money into super PACs or whatever, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather put $30 million of my own money. I'd rather do that than to be somebody else's circus monkey or pawn on a chessboard, which is what basically both political parties have become.